Welcome everybody. Brother Dan Goodwin here. This is the God's Final Jubilee program. We're glad that you joined us today. Whether you're visiting via YouTube or whether you're seeing us on Facebook or wherever you're watching this video, we'd like to welcome you. I'm Dan Goodwin. I'm the author of the book God's Final Jubilee, as well as the book The Barley Harvest, and a brand new book that is being printed right now. This is October the 2nd. 2017, this book right here, the Mystery of the Jubilee, is my newest book. It's just under 300 pages, being printed right now. Go to the website, godsfinaljubilee.com. You can find out how to get a copy of that. And so we're glad you're here. We got an important program for you today. I'm going to be discussing the barley harvest. There's been a lot of developments in recent hours about the barley and what they're calling the reset button in Israel. So we're going to deal with that. We're going to deal with the barley harvest in the program here. So, all right, you bear with me here, and we'll get rolling. All right. So, what is the barley harvest? Well, let's back up a little bit. There's been a lot of talk, and there's been a lot of, quite honestly, there's been a lot of date setting. And there's been a lot of folks, maybe not quite date setting, but there's sure a lot of hype about this Revelation 12 thing. I'm not going to deal with the Revelation 12 thing in detail tonight. You can go back and watch my prior videos. Those of you that know me, you know that I have not got too excited about the Revelation 12 sign. I'm not saying that constellations, I'm not saying that those things are not real. What I'm saying is I do not believe the conclusions that they have come to are quite accurate. I do not believe that the man-child in Revelation 12:5 is the church. Now, if you disagree with me, that's fine. We don't have to break fellowship. We don't have to be mad at each other. I've got good friends who sincerely believe that really, I've got friends that believe that the Lord was coming on September 23rd. One of my problems, though, has been that the Feast of Trumpets was actually 20th, 21st. And it seems like a lot of the Revelation 12 crowd keeps moving those dates to try to get them to line up closer to the 23rd. And my friends, you can't do that. You can't mess with God's calendar. You can't mess with the moons and the new moons and things. So Feast of Trumpets is on the new moon. I don't care what book you read. I don't care what you want to say. The new moon is day one in Israel on the calendar. You can't mess with it. You can't say, well, it's a 2-day event, therefore it's a... You know, we got to quit fudging with things just to make our dates come out right. You can't do that. So Feast of Trumpets came and went. And so then they decided, well, the rapture is going to be on the sign day, the Revelation 12 sign, which by the way, the Bible says there was a great wonder in heaven, not a great sign. Revelation 12:1. So, but anyway, they changed the date and said that the 23rd would be the rapture. Well, and some of them anyway, not everybody, but well, that came and went. So the next step was, well, I'll tell you what, it's the Day of Atonement, and they came out with this theory. I don't know where they got it. They came out with the theory that the Day of Atonement, which is day 10, Tishri 10 days after Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement. They came out with this theory or this belief that on a Jubilee year, that Rosh Hashanah or New Year's is celebrated not on day 1 but on day 10. Now that's just not so, my friend. That's not in the Bible. It's not. The trumpet of the Jubilee is sounded on the 10th day. The 10th day is not New Year's. Day 1 is New Year's. All right, so they came out with that. And then a couple of guys that I looked at on their YouTube channels, they literally set a date. They said the rapture will happen on day 10. After they'd already said the rapture is going to happen on the 23rd and then the 21st. So now we're on the third date. Well, guess what? When Day of Atonement came and went, I got on their YouTube channels and they were saying that it isn't over until sometime Sunday. Well, that's not true. In the Bible and in Israel, Day of Atonement was over. It was over Saturday at somewhere around 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. Saturday morning, that was the end of Yom Kippur. I heard one guy said that the trumpet of the Jubilee is sounded at the last moment, at the end of Day of Atonement. My friend, that's not true. we've got to quit twisting things to make our dates come out. The Day of Atonement is very simple. Read Leviticus 23, verse 9 and verse 10 and all the way through. And you'll find that on the 10th day of the month, on the 10th day of the 7th month, that's Tishri, 10 days after the Rosh Hashanah, after New Year, the trumpet of the Jubilee is blown. It's blown at 6 p.m. It's not blown the next day at 6 p.m. It's blown on the Day of Atonement. Yom Kippur, which is right at 6 p.m. when it begins. So we got to quit doing this. We're making ourselves look like fools to the world, and we're making ourselves look foolish to other Christians. Let's stop doing this. Let's get the Bible right. Let's use the Bible. Now, Feast of Day of Atonement begins at 6 p.m. on day 10. 6 p.m. on day 11th is now day 11. 6 p.m. the next day is the 11th. That's not when the trumpet's not blown at the end of the day, the next day. It's blown at 6 p.m. on the beginning of Yom Kippur. All right? So, Yom Kippur came and went. We're still here. Those who set a date and those who just maybe spread some hype about it but didn't set a date. So now what do they say? Some are saying tabernacles, but not too many. I haven't heard too many say that tabernacles is it, Feast of Tabernacles. But now what they're doing, and one guy came out with 2 videos. The first one was not bad, but the second one was better. The first one he came out with he was talking about the reset of the barley harvest, the reset of the seasons. And I saw his title and I clicked on it and said, boy, some of these guys are finally catching up to what's going on here. Some of them are finally catching up to the truth about the importance of understanding the barley and what it means in prophecy and what it meant in Bible days, what it meant to the Jewish calendar. So I listened to his video and he had a few things right and he had several things wrong. One thing he said that the Jews are using the Gregorian calendar. No, they're not. No, that's a mistake. The Jews are not using the Gregorian calendar. We're using the Gregorian calendar, the sun calendar. The Jews are using the lunar calendar. They're using the moon. Day 1 in Israel, and every month is always the new moon in the sky. The 14th day of all 12 months in Israel is the full moon in the sky. It's a lunar calendar. Our calendar has 365 and a fourth days. We add a leap year every 4 years. Remember that? February 29th is a leap year. By the way, last February, 2016, we had a leap year and we added a 29th day to February to fix our calendar, keep the seasons right? Because we're missing. We got a quarter extra day, 365.24444. The Jews' calendar is a lunar calendar, and it has 354 and a little bit extra days a year. Do you see a problem there? 354 days. Did I say 200? 354 days. They're missing just about 11 days every year on their calendar. Now, you don't have to be real smart to figure this out. After a few years, what happens? The seasons are off. Passover, one of these days, if they don't fix that, Passover is going to be in the wintertime. And my friend, Passover cannot be in the wintertime. And the Bible still be true. So here we go. The barley harvest is one of those missing pieces of the puzzle that I think everybody has missed. A little over a year ago, I wrote the book called The Barley Harvest. Now, I haven't sold a lot. We only printed about 1,500 of these. Of course, there's an ebook on Amazon. A lot of people have gotten the ebook, so I don't know how many of them are out there, but not a lot. Not like the Jubilee book sold tens of thousands. Now, this one hasn't took off quite as well. Maybe the title's not as catchy. I don't know. Maybe people think it's about farming, the barley harvest. Who wants to read about farming? It's not. It's about harvesting, and it's about prophecy, and it's about the nation of Israel. It's about Abib and what Abib means. But there's not as many of these books that have gotten out there. So there's a lot of people that don't understand the barley harvest. I want to help you understand this. I want to help you be able to explain this to somebody in your family or your neighbor. So it's one of those missing pieces of the puzzle. Remember, the calendars, the Jews' calendar is not like our calendar. And by the way, I do not trust either calendar. The Jews' calendar just turned over to the year 5778. We're in the year 2017. They're in the year 5778. Obviously, they're counting from Genesis 1, and they skip the church age because they don't believe in the church age. They're all just one big calendar, right? We split our calendar. We got Old Testament, New Testament. Our calendar isn't right. This is not 2017. We started our calendar at the wrong place. We started our calendar actually before the birth of Christ. And that's not where the calendar starts. The New Testament begins at the death of Christ, not the birth of Christ. And nobody's for sure where that is on the timeline. And nobody knows what people did to our calendar in the last 2,000 years. You cannot trust our calendar. Started at the wrong place. It's been messed with. Who knows what year this is? The Jewish calendar, that's not right either. There's proof, guaranteed proof, and documentation that some Jewish rabbis messed with the Jewish calendar a long time ago. There's over 200 years missing on their calendar. This is not the year 5778. This is getting very close to the year 5993. Because I believe the rapture will happen at the year 5993, because I believe in a 6,000-year earth. And if I'm right about that, and again, who knows, you can't be 100% sure of anything. But if it's a 6,000-year earth, we're getting pretty close to that. Now remember, the tribulation period is not church age. The tribulation is Old Testament. We learned that in Daniel 9. 70 weeks of years are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. What does that mean? The first 69 weeks were fulfilled. And when Jesus comes and dies on the cross, that ended the 69th week. But there's 1 week left. It's the 70th week. It's 7 years long. It's what we call the tribulation period. Is that New Testament or Old Testament? That's Old Testament. 70 weeks are determined not upon the church, but upon thy people and upon thy holy city. It's talking to Israel. Daniel chapter 9, right? Verse 24. Very simple. So the tribulation period, where does it fit on the timeline? It's Old Testament. Old Testament. So we're going to have 2,000 years in our timeline, the 2,000-year timeline. By the way, that's all in the new book. I have a couple of timelines in the book that deal with the 6,000-year earth and the 4,000 in the old, 2,000 in the new, 1,000-year millennium, 7,000-year total. So what's the big deal about all? The big deal is somewhere around the 2,000th year, I believe God's taking us out of here. Now, we don't know where that is. We don't know what year we're in. We could have 5 to 10 years left. We don't know. I don't think we do, but I mean, that's what I'm saying. You can never be dogmatic about these things. You can never know for sure what happened back then or what year this is, or don't ever be a date setter, my friend. Do not be a date setter. And if someone else sets a date, run from them. I run from date setters. You know what I have found over the years? Date setters are wrong. What percentage of the time? Let me think a minute. 100% of the time. Date setters are always wrong. Now, one of these days, someone's going to guess it right, okay? Now, by the way, if you pick every day and you say this is the rapture, you're going to be right one of those 365 days, but you're going to be foolish too. But so don't be a date setter, and don't run with date setters. Run from them, and because people are going to realize that you don't know what you're talking about, because you're never going to figure this out. And I'm going to explain why you're never going to figure this out in the Barley Harvest. So, the Jewish calendar, let me just give you a couple things here. There's so much I could share with you, but we don't have time. The two calendars differ in days. How does Israel fix their calendar, their seasons? If there's only 354 days on their calendar, how do they fix that? How do they keep the seasons right? Well, what they do now, what they have done since 300 and something AD, they do it mathematically. There's a Jewish rabbi that came up with a system after the Jews were scattered. He came up with a system to determine Passover every year. Remember, there are 7 feasts in the Bible. Leviticus chapter 23, Leviticus 27, 7 feasts. These 7 feasts are God's biblical prophetic calendar. Wow, boy, if you'll get that, it's life-changing. 7 feasts, and they're all listed for us in Leviticus chapter 23. I have a whole session on it in my DVD set. The 7 feasts of the Lord, God's prophetic calendar. I have a whole PowerPoint presentation that you can get on the website. So these 7 feasts take place in a period of 7 months. From the month of Abib or Nisan all the way to the 7th month, which is Tishri, which, by the way, we're in the month of Tishri right now, we think. Can't know. I'll tell you why in a minute. But the Jewish calendar right now is in the month Tishri. Rosh Hashanah, Feast of Trumpets, was day 1 of Tishri. We believe that's prophetic of the rapture. All right, but you'll never know when it is, because you'll never know when Feast of Trumpets is, because you can't trust anybody's calendar. You'll learn why in a second here. All right, so hang with me, and we'll figure this out. So, 7 feasts that take place in a period of 7 months. There is an automatic reset. Now, the Jews have a mathematical system. You can go into the future, 100 years in the future. You can type in when is Passover in the year 2084, and it'll tell you when it is. But that's not biblical. There's no way biblical for the Jews or anybody else to be able to figure out when Passover is next year, because Passover is determined by the barley harvest every year in Bible days. Now, before the dispersion, before the Jews were kicked out of their land, lost their temple, and were overrun, before that, they were using the system the Bible calls Abib. Now, that's not something you wear. There is such a thing as a bib that you wear so you don't get food on you, right? We're not talking about that Abib. We're talking about the word A-B-I-B, Abib. You'll find it in Deuteronomy 16, verse 1. Let me just read some verses for you. Exodus 13:4, this day came ye out in the month Abib. What is God saying? God's saying, I brought you out of Egypt in what month? Not the month Nisan. That's the word that we use. Gentiles use the word Nisan. Now, the Jews use it now too. That's a word that's used outside of Israel. When they were brought out into captivity, they began using the word Nisan. But the God used the word Abib. There's a difference. Nisan is the 7th month Tishri. But Nisan does not mean Abib. Abib means that the barley is at a certain stage of ripeness. I've read in different books that Abib means that the barley is within 6 to 11 days of harvest time. They would go out to the field. Let me read the verses for you. This day came ye out in the month of Abib. God said in Exodus, he said, this day I brought you out in the month of Abib. In other words, they came out of Egypt in the month of the ripeness of the barley. Passover month. It's called Passover month, the month Abib. Exodus 23, in the time appointed of the month Abib, for in it thou camest out from Egypt. What month did they come out of Egypt? Passover month. We call that Nisan. God calls it Abib or Abib, however you pronounce that. Exodus 34, 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread. Hey, what month is that? That's Passover month. Unleavened bread begins the evening of Passover at 6 p.m., begins a 7-day period called unleavened bread. That's during Passover month. We call it Nisan. God calls it what? Abib. That's what it says. 7 days shalt thou eat unleavened bread as I commanded thee, and in the time of the month Abib, for in the month Abib thou camest out of Egypt. There's the third verse in a row. Exodus 13, Exodus 23, Exodus 34. 3 verses in a row that call the month of Passover the month of Abib. What does Abib mean? It means that the barley is ripe. I've got Webster's definition here. Let me just read you what Mr. Webster in 1828 said. He said, Abib is a noun, to be swelling, to produce the first or the early fruit. He says this, the first month of the Jewish ecclesiastical year, called also Nisan. It begins in the spring equinox and answers to the latter part of March or the beginning of April on our Gregorian calendar. Nisan is a noun, a month of the Jewish calendar, the first month of the sacred year. But Nisan doesn't have that definition about the ripeness and the ripeness of the barley. So Abib means that the barley is at a certain stage of ripeness. In other words, let me say this. The barley has to be at a stage that when Passover arrives, the barley will be ready to harvest. Now, why is that? Because Leviticus chapter 23 tells us the barley has to be waved as a sheaf offering on the Feast of First Fruits 3 days after Passover. In other words, Passover is on the 14th, the very first day of the week, Sunday, after Passover. It's usually 3 days, but not always. When Jesus died on the cross, it just so happens it was 3 days exactly to Feast of First Fruits, the first day of the week. But it doesn't have to be. But the first day of the week after Passover is the Feast of First Fruits. They were commanded under Moses' law, Leviticus 23, they were commanded to take the sheaves of barley and wave them as an offering before the Lord. How do you do that if there's no barley? Hey, if there's still snow on the ground, how do you do that? Quick answer, you don't. How do you have Passover if there's no barley? You don't. what did they do? This is the reset button. What they would do, if the barley is within 6 to 11 days of being ripe, they announced it's Abib. What that means? That means the next day is day 1 of the month of Abib. We call it Nisan. 14 days later will be Passover on the 14th, right? Yeah, on the 10th, you pick your lamb out of the flock, and then you watch it for 4 days. And then on the 14th, you kill your lamb, and it's Passover. If the barley is not ripe or not Abib, they would announce that it is now Adar 2. They would add a second Adar month. See, that's the month of Adar. Month 12 is the month they call Adar. A-D-A-R, Adar, or Adar, whatever you want to call it. So they would, if the barley's ripe, they go right into, by the way, this is done on the last day of Adar. The next day is either going to be Adar 2, a leap month, or it's going to be Passover month. Everybody with me there? Rewind this if you need to and watch it again. On the last day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, right before Passover month, they would look at the barley. Now this was the Levites' job. They would look at the barley and they would determine it's either Abib or it's not. It's either ready or it's not. If it's ready, everything goes on as planned. 14 days later will be Passover. If it's not ready, they know the season is off. It's time to reset the calendar. It's a biblical reset. It's a harvest reset. It resets the season. They'll add the month. And then by the next month, that barley will be ready and they'll celebrate Passover. So what does that do? When that month is added, by the way, they added a month in 2016. That's why I wrote the book, way back in March. Remember 2016 in March? Remember we celebrated what we call Easter, Resurrection Sunday. I don't call it Easter, but remember we celebrated the resurrection in March? I think it was March 22nd or 25th, I forget now. We celebrated the resurrection. And then in April, about 3 weeks later, the Jews celebrated Passover. And I scratched my head. I understood a little bit of why, but I said, I want to get to the bottom of this. I want to get to the bottom of why they add that month and how this is done and what it all means. And this book was born out of that study. And I'm telling you, it's the final missing link of this whole puzzle is this right here, the Barley Harvest. I'm not trying to sell you a book. If you're not a reader and if you want to accuse me of being after your money, go ahead. Just turn the channel off. Go watch somebody else's channel. I'm not trying to get your money. I don't need your money. God takes good care of me. I'm trying to tell you there's some truth out there that you need. There's some things out there that you need to understand to keep you from setting dates all the time. Quit being a date setter. When you understand this right here, what I'm telling you, you'll realize nobody could ever figure this out because you will never know when the barley's right, when it's Abib. So there was another verse here in Deuteronomy chapter 16. Here's verse number 4 that has the word Abib in it. Deuteronomy 16, observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover. That's solid proof, once again, 4 times in a row, solid proof the month of Abib is Passover month. I've got a little saying that I put in the book. In fact, this is also in my brand new book. I got some sections in here about the Abib and what that means and the mystery of the Abib barley and the wonderful truths we learn from it. But what this is telling us is it's solid evidence that Abib is Passover month. In the book, I got a statement. I say this: no Abib, no Passover. All right. No, if no Abib, no barley, no Abib. No Abib, no Passover. Let me say it again because I said it wrong the first time. No barley, in other words, no ripe barley, no Abib. If the barley's not red, you can't call it Abib. No barley, no Abib. No Abib, no Passover. There cannot be Passover without barley. Are you getting this? Cannot be Passover without barley. Now, you say, well, what about today? Doesn't matter today. We're on the other side of the veil. Don't pay any attention today. Doesn't matter when they celebrate Passover in Israel today. You can't trust their calendar. Anybody listening out there? You cannot trust their calendar. You can't trust that they're not keeping Passover on the proper day. They're not keeping Abib. Haven't for a couple thousand years now. By the way, last time I checked, there's no temple in Israel. There's no Levitical priesthood. There are no qualified Levites operating right now in Israel to go out and check the barley to see if it's Abib. None. Now, there are some groups, I understand there's some groups out there who have taken upon themselves to look at the barley and determine, I don't pay any attention to that. It doesn't matter. The Jews are not under this system. They're not doing the temple. So none of it matters. They're not keeping the dates right. They're not keeping Passover right. Ignore that stuff. That's not what this is about. That's not what the barley means to us. I'll explain this. So, you understand what I'm saying? The calendar, 354 days on their calendar. Every 3 or 4 years, by the way, the calendar that Jewish rabbi did in 300 and something AD, where he made a mathematical system, it's a 19-year cycle where he adds the leap year automatically. That's why in 2016 there was a leap year month added. That was done mathematically. Nobody went out and looked at the barley and determined that. It was done mathematically. That's not God's system. God's system is you check the barley. When the barley's right, it's Passover month. Passover month follows that. And if the barley is Abib, that means it's within 6 to 11 days of harvest, which means that by the time Passover comes, that barley guaranteed will be ready to wave the sheaf offering on the first fruits. All right, that, by the way, that resets all 7 feasts. Somebody mentioned that on one of those videos I watched. They said, well, somebody asked a question, what does that do to the other feast? And he wasn't sure about that. Well, I'm sure about it. Passover resets, that resets all 7 feasts in the future. How, you say, Brother Goodwin, what do you mean? If Passover is postponed a month, then Feast of Unleavened Bread is postponed a month. Feast of First Fruits is postponed a month, but which, by the way, Feast of First Fruits, you begin counting 49 days to Pentecost. That's the 4th feast. So Pentecost is backed up a month because Passover was backed up a month, and Unleavened Bread's backed up a month, and First Fruits is backed up a month. What does that mean? That means month number 7, which is Tishri, that's backed up a month. So you'd have to shift the whole 7-month calendar, moves forward a month, and a leap year month is stuck in the middle there. I hope you understand what I'm saying there. So leap year month, leap year, adding that 13th month changes all 7 feasts. That's why nobody can decide next year when Pentecost is. If you're doing it right, if you're doing it according to the barley, the biblical way, you don't know next year when Pentecost is because you don't know when the field or when the barley is Abib. You can't know. You can't know until the month before Passover month. You can't know until 2 weeks before Passover if the barley's ripe or not. And by the way, it's not your decision. It's the Levitical priesthood's decision. And now we're not under that, so it doesn't matter. But there are prophetic lessons for us. All right, everybody got this? All right, there's some prophetic lessons that we need to understand here. And let me just give me a couple more minutes and I'll shut her down here. But there's some prophetic lessons to do with this. Somebody, I taught this on a YouTube program a while back. And somebody sent me a message. Said, Brother Goodwin, this is exciting. Brother Goodwin, was the barley Abib this year? And I scratched my head and I said, no, don't be offended. Don't take this wrong. But I said, my goodness, you don't get it. You don't get, God is not looking at the barley in Israel to determine the end times. God is looking at what? By the way, God is not looking at the church. I know that's going to bother some of you out there. God is not looking at the church to determine the end time. God is not looking and waiting for the last soul to get saved and then he hits a button. All right, the last soul just got in, hit the button, that's it. Pull the lever, that's it. Get them out of there. That's way off base. What is God looking? By the way, God's not looking at the condition of the church. A lot of folks believe that God is looking at the church, and when the church reaches a certain point of apostasy, God hits the button and takes us out of here. That makes for good preaching, but it's not true. God is not looking at the church. He's not waiting for the last soul to get saved. He's not looking at the condition of God's people, his people. What is God looking at? Looking at the barley. Not this barley, not the field. What does the barley represent? The barley represents the nation of Israel. I can prove that, and I proved it in the book. In the book of Joshua, not the book of Judges, I believe it's chapter 6 or 7 there. What does it say? It says the story of Gideon. Remember the story of Gideon? In the story of Gideon, remember the Midianite, in fact there's a chapter in the new book called the Mystery of the Midianite's Dream. That's what that's about. The Midianite guy had a dream. In his dream, remember the story of Gideon? There's tens of thousands of Midianites in the valley. They're getting ready to destroy Israel. Gideon's up on the hill with 300 men that are going to, supposedly go to battle with these tens of thousands. God tells Gideon to go down there and listen. Gideon takes one of his men, goes down and listens. Inside one of the tents is a Midianite, one of the enemies. And he tells the other guy in the tent, he tells him, I had a dream last night. And the other guy said, look, I'm pretty good with dreams. Tell me your dream. Maybe I can help you. And he says, well, in my dream, a cake of barley. So picture this big round loaf of bread. A cake of barley. In my dream, he said, this cake of barley rolled down the hill, flattened my tent, and killed, and that was it. And the other guy, you know what he said? Something very prophetic. He said, that's none other than the sword of Gideon, and we're going to die tomorrow. I'm ad-libbing there, but that's what he said. He said, that's Israel. That barley is Israel, and they're going to destroy us tomorrow. And by the way, they did. So you can read the story for yourself in the book of Judges. What do we learn there? We learned that barley was understood by the Midianites to be a type of the nation of Israel. There's many other places I could show you in the Bible as well. The feeding the 5,000, the 12 baskets full of barley, that's in the book as well. So in other words, the barley is what? The barley is a type of Israel. What's the wheat? Remember, there's 3 harvests. There's the barley harvest in this early spring, Passover time. Wheat harvest is at Pentecost time. And then in the fall is the fruit harvest. We're in the fruit harvest right now. So what does the wheat represent? Remember Pentecost? Did you know on Pentecost the Jews will bake 2 loaves of bread, a loaf of barley and a loaf of wheat together, not even realizing what that means. That means in the church age there's neither Jew nor Gentile. We serve together in the church age, the Jew and the Gentile. The wheat being us and the barley being Israel. The barley's Israel. What is God looking at to determine Abib? Not the church, not you, not the spiritual temperature of the church, not waiting for the last guy to get saved. God is looking at the nation of Israel. When the nation of Israel is Abib, God will hit the reset button, and I believe 7 months to the day on a new moon in the fall, the trumpet will sound. Now, I can't be sure that it's a new moon in the fall. I think it is, but I can't be sure. You can't be dogmatic about this stuff. You got to realize that. You can't ever be dogmatic about any of this. God could come on a Feast of Trumpets that's not a new moon in the sky if he chooses. Now, I don't see that happening, but it could. You can't be dogmatic about this. So my caution is this: quit setting dates. So now they've moved on to the barley harvest. They're getting closer to the truth here. They're beginning to understand some things that I would have liked to have shared with them a year ago. And I tried to share this with Brother Steve from the heavenlysign.com. I tried to share this with him. He cut me off. He's kind of angry, I think. I'm sorry that he's angry. We're just trying to help him so that we don't get in the predicament that we're in right now, because these dates keep passing and everyone's scratching their head. Why are we still here? I'll tell you why we're still here, because God hasn't pulled us out of here, because the barley harvest. You'll never know the calendar. You'll never understand the Jewish calendar. You'll never figure out what month it is on the Jewish calendar, because God will determine that from heaven, not man, not a Jewish priest, not a Levite, not a prophecy preacher in another state somewhere. God in heaven will determine Abib, not by the barley in the field. He's going to determine Abib by looking at Israel. When Israel is Abib, God will hit the reset button. I believe it'll happen. And I believe 7 months later, that 7-month period will take place and God pulls us out of here, possibly in a fall new moon. Maybe this fall, maybe this October, maybe this November, but maybe next year, maybe the year after. We don't know, because only God knows when it's Abib. Did you get that? Did you get this? This could be the missing piece of the puzzle that brings the peace that you're looking for. No man knows the day or the hour. I realize that verse isn't talking about the rapture. It's talking about the second coming. You'll never know the day of the second coming any more than you'll know the day of the first coming at the rapture. Can't know, because it has to do with the barley harvest. Now, what is necessary in closing for Israel to be Abib, to be ready for the end times? Very simple. They got to be in their land, because Israel has to be in their land to make the covenant with the Antichrist and to begin the temple worship. Last time I checked, they're there, right? Been there for 70 years. Yeah. That's interesting, right? Nobody ever said these things weren't interesting. Nobody ever said it didn't look like we were at the end. I've said that since 2014, that we're near the end. And since 2014, I have felt that this time right now is the time of the end. But I would never set a date and would never suggest you set a date. And I'll run from you when you set a date because you're going to be wrong. You're not going to figure this out. You don't know when it's Abib. Neither do I. All right, Israel's got to be in their land. Israel's got to be looking for peace because that's what the covenant's all about, peace, right? They've got to be looking for peace. Hey, somebody call Israel and see if they're looking for peace. You better believe they're looking for peace. Those people are tired of fighting. They're tired of this.